Emma stepped out of the steamy shower, water droplets cascading down her soft skin. She had been rushing all day, trying to prepare for the dinner party she and her husband Jack were hosting that evening. Their friends would arrive in less than an hour, and she still needed to dry her hair and get dressed. She wrapped a small towel around her body, but it barely covered what it needed to. The bathroom mirror was fogged up, so Emma opened the door and walked into the bedroom to use the full-length mirror instead. The cool air hit her damp skin, causing goosebumps to form across her arms and legs. She let the towel drop to the floor, standing completely naked as she examined her reflection. At 30, Emma's body had maintained its curves in all the right places. Her skin glowed from the hot shower, and her wet hair fell in dark strands around her shoulders. She turned to the side, running her hands over her hips, thinking about which dress would be best for tonight. Downstairs, Jack was busy preparing drinks for their guests. The doorbell rang, and he hurried to answer it, finding his best friend Tom standing there with a bottle of wine. "You're early," Jack said with a smile, taking the wine and clapping his friend on the back. "Traffic was lighter than I expected," Tom replied. "Need any help setting up?" "Actually, could you grab the ice bucket from upstairs? It's in the guest room, second door on the right." Tom nodded and headed up the stairs, his footsteps muffled by the carpet. He reached the top of the staircase and paused, trying to remember which door Jack had mentioned. Second on the right, he thought, walking down the hallway. He turned the handle and pushed the door open without knocking. The scene that greeted him made his heart stop. There stood Emma, completely naked, her back partially turned toward him as she examined herself in the mirror. The soft evening light from the window caressed her bare skin, highlighting every curve of her body. For a split second, Tom froze, unable to move or speak. His eyes took in the sight before him. The gentle slope of her back, the curve of her hips, her long legs. Emma turned at the sound of the door, her eyes widening in shock as she saw Tom standing there. Their eyes locked for what felt like an eternity but was really only a moment. Tom could see the rise and fall of her chest as her breathing quickened. A deep blush spread across Emma's skin as she scrambled to grab the towel from the floor. "I'm so sorry," Tom stuttered, quickly averting his gaze and backing out of the room. "Jack told me to get something from the guest room. I didn't know you were, I'm sorry." He pulled the door shut and leaned against the wall in the hallway, his heart racing. The image of Emma's naked body was burned into his mind. Tom had always thought of her as attractive, but in a distant way, she was his best friend's wife, after all. Now, he couldn't stop the heat rising in his body or the guilt that immediately followed it. Inside the bedroom, Emma clutched the towel to her chest, her face burning with embarrassment. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to process what had just happened. Tom had seen her completely naked. The look in his eyes, surprise, yes, but something else too. Appreciation. Desire? She shouldn't be thinking about that. She sat on the edge of the bed, taking deep breaths to calm herself. It was just an accident, she told herself. These things happen, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in that brief moment their eyes met. Emma forced herself to get up and get dressed. She chose a black dress that hugged her figure, then spent extra time on her makeup, trying to regain her composure. How would she face Tom now? Should she tell Jack? No, that would only make things awkward for everyone. It was better to pretend it never happened. Downstairs, Tom had found the correct room and retrieved the ice bucket. He handed it to Jack without meeting his eyes, then poured himself a strong drink. He would need it to get through the evening. As he took a long sip, he heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Emma descending, now elegantly dressed in her black dress. Their eyes met briefly before both quickly looked away. The doorbell rang again as more guests arrived. The evening was beginning, and both Emma and Tom would have to navigate the next few hours pretending that nothing had happened, even as the tension between them threatened to fill the room. The dinner party was in full swing, the dining room filled with laughter and conversation as Jack poured wine for their 5 guests. Emma moved between the kitchen and dining room, bringing out dishes she had prepared earlier. She smiled and chatted, but her mind kept returning to what had happened upstairs. Every time she glanced at Tom, she caught him quickly looking away. He sat across the table, next to a woman named Lisa, who kept touching his arm when she laughed. Emma felt a strange twinge watching this. She told herself it was just lingering embarrassment from the incident, nothing more. "The food is amazing," said David, another friend of Jack's. "Emma, you've outdone yourself." Emma smiled, accepting the compliment, but noticed Tom hadn't touched much of his food. He seemed distracted, drinking more than eating. When their eyes accidentally met, a jolt of electricity passed between them. Emma quickly looked down at her plate, her cheeks warming. "Are you feeling all right?" Jack whispered, placing his hand on Emma's thigh under the table. "You seem flushed." "I'm fine," she said, taking a large sip of wine. "Just a bit warm from cooking." Jack squeezed her thigh affectionately and turned back to his conversation with David. Emma's skin tingled where his hand had been, but her eyes drifted to Tom again. This time he was watching her openly, his gaze intense. When he realized she had caught him staring, he quickly joined Lisa's conversation, laughing a bit too loudly at something she said. After dinner, they moved to the living room for drinks. Emma sat next to Jack on the couch, his arm casually draped around her shoulders. Tom chose a chair farthest from them, but the placement meant he was directly in Emma's line of sight. "Remember the camping trip we took last summer?" Jack asked, addressing the group but looking at Tom. When Tom fell into the lake with all his clothes on, everyone laughed, and Tom rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "You pushed me," he said, smiling despite himself. "I did not," Jack protested. "You were trying to take a picture of that bird and lost your balance." As they bantered, Emma found herself studying Tom's face, his strong jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his dark hair fell across his forehead. She had known him for years, but somehow tonight he looked different to her. When he laughed, his whole face lit up, and Emma felt something stir inside her. "I need some air," Tom suddenly announced, standing up. "Mind if I step out to your back porch for a minute, Jack?" "Go ahead," Jack replied, refilling everyone's glasses. Emma waited a few minutes, then excused herself to get more ice from the kitchen. Once there, she paused, looking through the window at Tom standing alone on the porch. The moonlight cast shadows across his face as he stared out into the darkness. Before she could stop herself, Emma opened the back door and stepped outside. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, closing the door behind her. Tom turned, surprised. "Emma," he said, her name sounding different on his lips. "I'm fine, just needed some fresh air." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party muffled behind them. The night air was cool against Emma's skin. "About earlier," Tom finally said, his voice low. "I'm really sorry. I should have knocked." "It was an accident," Emma replied, trying to sound casual. "These things happen." Tom stepped closer to her. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about it," he admitted, his eyes intense in the moonlight. "About you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should step back, go inside, end this conversation before it went somewhere dangerous, but her feet wouldn't move. "We should forget it happened," she whispered, but even as she said it, she moved slightly closer to him. "Is that what you want?" Tom asked, his voice husky. He was close enough now that she could feel the warmth of his body, smell his cologne mixed with the wine on his breath. Before she could answer, the back door opened. Jack stood there, silhouetted against the light from inside. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, looking between them with curiosity. Emma stepped back quickly. "Just getting some air," she said, her voice higher than normal. "Coming back in now." As she brushed past Jack, he placed his hand on the small of her back, a casual gesture of intimacy that now felt like a reminder. Emma glanced back at Tom, who remained on the porch, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Back inside, Emma moved through the rest of the evening in a daze. She laughed at jokes she barely heard, refilled glasses, and cleaned up plates, all while acutely aware of Tom's presence in the room. The tension between them was like a silent conversation that only they could hear. Every accidental touch, every glance, seemed loaded with meaning. 3 weeks passed since the dinner party, but Emma couldn't shake the memory of that night. She found herself thinking about Tom at odd moments, while cooking dinner, during her morning shower, or lying in bed next to Jack. The way Tom had looked at her on the porch, his voice when he said he couldn't stop thinking about her. It was wrong to dwell on these thoughts, she knew that, but they came anyway. Jack hadn't noticed anything unusual. He went about his normal routine, leaving early for work and coming home tired. Their relationship continued as it always had, comfortable, predictable, safe. But something had changed in Emma. She felt restless, distracted. When Jack touched her at night, she closed her eyes and sometimes, just for a moment, imagined different hands on her skin. One afternoon, Emma's phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart jumped when she saw it was from Tom. They had exchanged numbers years ago for practical reasons, coordinating birthday surprises for Jack, checking if the other was bringing food to gatherings. But Tom had never texted her directly before. "Can we talk? I need to clear the air." Emma stared at the message for a long time, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She should ignore it or politely decline. Instead, she typed, "When?" His response came quickly. "Coffee tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Miller's Cafe." Emma thought about her empty schedule, the quiet house, Jack at work until evening. "Ok," she replied, then immediately felt a rush of guilt and excitement. That night, she was unusually attentive to Jack, making his favorite dinner and initiating sex for the first time in weeks. As Jack moved above her, whispering how much he loved her, Emma closed her eyes and tried to focus only on her husband. But Tom's face kept appearing in her mind, and when she reached her climax, she had to bite her lip to make sure she didn't say the wrong name. The next day, Emma spent extra time getting ready. She told herself it was nothing special, just a casual meeting with her husband's friend to clear up an awkward situation. But she changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a blue dress that Jack once said brought out her eyes. She applied makeup carefully, sprayed perfume on her wrists and neck, then looked at herself in the mirror, the same mirror where Tom had seen her naked. Miller's Cafe was busy when she arrived. Tom was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees. He stood when he saw her, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't say things like that." Emma sat down, suddenly nervous. "It's fine," she said. "Thank you for the coffee." They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, both avoiding eye contact. About that night, Tom finally began. "I've been trying to forget it, but I can't. Not just seeing you, like that, but our conversation on the porch. I've never felt that kind of connection with someone so quickly." Emma's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Tom, I'm married to your best friend." "I know," he said, his voice strained. "God, don't you think I know that? I've been torturing myself about this. Jack is like a brother to me. The last thing I want to do is hurt him." "Then what are we doing here?" Emma asked softly. Tom reached across the table and touched her hand briefly. Even that small contact sent electricity through her body. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know I needed to see you. To figure out if what I felt that night was real or just some crazy moment." "And?" Emma asked, her heart pounding. Tom looked at her, his eyes intense. "It's real, at least for me." Emma felt like she couldn't breathe. She should get up, walk away, end this before it went any further. Instead, she said, "For me too." The admission hung between them, changing everything. Tom's phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the moment. He glanced at it and his face paled. "It's Jack," he said. "He's asking if I want to come over for the game tomorrow." Reality crashed back into the moment. Jack, her husband, the man she had promised to love and be faithful to. What was she doing? "I should go," Emma said, standing up. Tom stood too, reaching for her arm. "Emma, wait. We need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," she said, though her body leaned toward his touch. "It was a mistake to come here. We can't do this to Jack." "What about us?" Tom asked, his voice low. "What about what we're feeling?" Emma looked at him, memorizing his face, the hopeful, pained expression. The way his hair fell over his forehead, the slight stubble on his jaw. Part of her wanted to throw caution away, to see where this intense attraction might lead. But a stronger part knew the cost would be too high. "There is no us," she said firmly, though her heart protested. "There can't be." A month passed, and Emma had successfully avoided being alone with Tom. When Jack invited him over to watch games, she made excuses to be out of the house. When group gatherings happened, she stayed firmly by Jack's side. She ignored the 2 text messages Tom sent, asking if they could talk again. Life was returning to normal, or so she told herself. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, Jack dropped a bombshell over breakfast. "I have to go to Chicago for the conference," he said, spreading jam on his toast. I'll be gone for 5 days, starting Friday. Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. This Friday, but we were supposed to have dinner with your parents on Saturday. Jack looked genuinely apologetic. I know, but this came up suddenly. Wilson can't go, so they asked me to present instead. It's a big opportunity. Emma nodded, understanding but disappointed. Jack's work trips were happening more frequently lately, and each time she found herself alone in their too-quiet house. I'll be fine, she said, forcing a smile. I'll reschedule with your parents. Jack reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I asked Tom to stop by and fix that leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. He's good with that stuff, and he owes me a favor. Emma's heart raced. You what? When? Saturday, probably. I told him to text you and work out the details. Jack seemed completely oblivious to her panic. You don't mind, do you? It'll be nice to have one thing off our list. Of course not, Emma lied, her mouth suddenly dry. That's helpful. Later that day, her phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Jack asked me to fix your faucet. Is Saturday afternoon okay? Emma stared at the message for a long time before replying, Fine, 2 p.m. The rest of the week crawled by. Emma found herself both dreading and anticipating Saturday. She cleaned the house obsessively, as if scrubbing floors could erase the unwanted feelings she still harbored. When Jack left early Friday morning, kissing her goodbye and promising to call every night, she felt a mixture of guilt and relief. Saturday dawned bright and clear. Emma woke after a restless night, her dreams filled with images she didn't want to remember. She showered, taking extra time with her hair, then scolded herself in the mirror for caring how she looked. This wasn't a date, it was just Tom coming to fix a faucet. At precisely 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Emma took a deep breath and opened the door. Tom stood there, toolbox in hand, looking as nervous as she felt. Hi, he said simply. Hi, she replied, stepping back to let him in. Thanks for doing this. Tom nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. No problem. Where's the bathroom? Emma led him upstairs, painfully aware of his presence behind her. The guest bathroom was at the end of the hallway, past the bedroom where he had seen her naked. They both glanced at the closed bedroom door as they walked by, the memory hanging between them unspoken. In the bathroom, Tom set down his toolbox and examined the faucet. This shouldn't take long, just a loose fitting probably. Emma hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to stay or go. The bathroom was small, and Tom's presence seemed to fill it completely. Do you need anything? She asked. Water? Coffee? I'm good, Tom replied, but then turned to face her fully. Actually, no. I'm not good, Emma. We need to talk about what happened at the cafe. Emma crossed her arms protectively. There's nothing to talk about. I made myself clear. You said what you thought you should say, Tom countered, taking a step toward her. Not what you really felt. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Emma knew she should step back, walk away, go downstairs and wait until he was finished. Instead, she stood her ground. What I feel doesn't matter, she said quietly. I'm married to Jack. He trusts both of us. Tom ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Don't you think I know that? I've been friends with him for 15 years. But this thing between us, I've never felt anything like it. He was close now, close enough that Emma could smell his cologne, see the tiny flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It's just attraction, she whispered, trying to convince herself as much as him. It'll pass. Will it? Tom asked, his voice low. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and touched her cheek. His fingers were warm against her skin. It's been almost 2 months, and I still think about you every day. Emma closed her eyes, torn between leaning into his touch and pulling away. Tom, we can't. I know, he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. I know we can't, but I needed you to know that this isn't casual for me. If things were different. Emma hung up the phone after talking to Jack. Her hands were still shaking. Upstairs, she could hear Tom working on the faucet, the occasional clang of tools against porcelain. She poured herself a glass of wine. Even though it was only mid-afternoon, she needed something to calm her nerves. Outside, the gentle rain had turned into a downpour. Lightning flashed, followed by a crack of thunder that made Emma jump. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The house fell silent except for the drumming of rain on the roof. "Emma?" Tom called from upstairs. "Do you have a flashlight?" "In the kitchen drawer," she replied, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "I'll bring it up." She fumbled in the drawer until her fingers found the cold metal of the flashlight. Testing it, she was relieved to see it still worked. She made her way carefully up the darkened stairs, the beam of light bouncing ahead of her. Tom was standing in the hallway when she reached the top, his tall figure silhouetted against the gray light from the bathroom window. She handed him the flashlight, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Perfect timing," he said with a small smile. "I just finished the repair." Another flash of lightning lit up the hallway, illuminating his face for a moment. In that brief glow, Emma saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. Thunder followed immediately, so loud it seemed to shake the house. "That was close," Emma said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "The storm must be right over us." As if to confirm her words, another bolt of lightning struck with a deafening crack. The lights in the house flickered briefly, then died again. Emma gasped involuntarily, taking a step back. Tom reached out to steady her, his hand firm on her arm. "It's okay," he said softly. "Just the storm." But they both knew it wasn't just the storm making her tremble. His hand remained on her arm, warm through the thin fabric of her blouse. They stood like that for what felt like forever, neither moving away, the only light coming from the flashlight Tom had set on the windowsill. "I should go," Tom finally said, but his hand still hadn't left her arm. "Before the roads get worse." "Yes," Emma agreed, but made no move toward the stairs. Instead, her eyes were drawn to his lips. She remembered how they had felt on her cheek when he had greeted her at parties, the casual kiss of a friend. She wondered how they would feel against her own lips, against her neck, against her skin. Tom seemed to read her thoughts. "Emma," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Tell me to leave. Right now. Because if you don't..." She couldn't say the words. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, just enough to signal her consent. Tom's hand moved from her arm to her face, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart ache. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When their lips finally met, Emma felt a jolt of desire so strong it made her knees weak. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but quickly grew deeper, more urgent. Tom's arms encircled her waist, pulling her against him. Emma's hands found their way into his hair, then down to his shoulders, feeling the strength beneath his shirt. Years of denied attraction exploded between them, making the storm outside seem calm in comparison. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, the rational part of Emma's brain tried one last time to assert itself. "We shouldn't," she whispered against his mouth. "I know," Tom replied, his forehead resting against hers. "Do you want me to stop?" Emma knew this was her last chance to do the right thing. One word from her, and Tom would leave. They could pretend this never happened. She could go back to her safe, predictable life with Jack. But the storm had awakened something in her that couldn't be put back to sleep. "No," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. "I don't want you to stop." Tom's eyes darkened with desire. He kissed her again, more deeply this time, his hands running down her back to pull her closer. Emma felt herself being guided backward until her back met the wall of the hallway. Tom's body pressed against hers, letting her feel how much he wanted her. The bedroom door was just a few feet away, the same bedroom where this had all started months ago. As if reading her mind again, Tom broke the kiss and looked toward the door, then back at her, a question in his eyes. Emma knew crossing that threshold would change everything forever. There would be no going back, no pretending it was just a moment of weakness. It would be a deliberate choice to betray Jack, to break the vows she had made. The morning sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, falling across the tangled sheets. Emma opened her eyes slowly, momentarily confused by the weight of an arm draped over her waist. Then the memories of the previous night came flooding back. Tom, the storm, what they had done. She turned carefully to look at him. Tom was still sleeping, his face relaxed and peaceful. In sleep he looked younger, almost innocent, which seemed absurd considering what had happened between them. Emma studied him, the strong line of his jaw, the dark stubble that had scratched pleasantly against her skin, the small scar above his eyebrow she had never noticed before. Last night they had explored each other's bodies with an intensity that had left her breathless. Now, in the harsh light of day, reality was setting in. The storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies and the aftermath of their passion. Emma slipped out from under Tom's arm and gathered her clothes, which were scattered across the floor. She dressed quickly and quietly, then padded downstairs to make coffee, her body pleasantly sore in places that reminded her of every touch, every kiss. In the kitchen, Emma leaned against the counter and closed her eyes. What had she done? Jack would be home in 3 days. The thought of her husband made her stomach twist with guilt. She had betrayed him in the worst possible way, with his best friend in their bed, and yet she couldn't bring herself to fully regret it. Last night with Tom had awakened something in her that she hadn't even known was sleeping. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her open her eyes. Tom appeared in the doorway, fully dressed but with his hair still mussed from sleep. He looked at her uncertainly, as if he wasn't sure how to act now. "Morning," he said quietly. "Hi," Emma replied, not knowing what else to say. What was the proper etiquette after sleeping with your husband's best friend? Tom took a step into the kitchen. "Emma, about last night." "I made coffee," she interrupted, not ready to have the conversation she knew they needed to have. Tom accepted the cup she offered, their fingers brushing briefly. Even that small contact sent a shiver through Emma. After everything they had shared, her body still responded to his touch as if magnetized. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Tom set down his cup and looked at her directly. "I don't regret it," he said, his voice firm. I know that. But I don't." Emma looked down at her coffee. "I don't either," she admitted softly. "And that makes me a terrible person." "No," Tom said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It makes you human. What we did, it wasn't just physical, Emma. At least not for me." Emma squeezed his hand. "Not for me either. And that's what scares me." The truth hung between them. This wasn't just a one-night stand, a mistake made in the heat of passion. There were real feelings involved, complicated ones that couldn't simply be put back in a box and forgotten. "What happens now?" Tom asked. It was the question Emma had been asking herself since she woke up. What happened now? Did they continue this affair behind Jack's back? Did she confess everything to her husband? Did she leave Jack for Tom? None of the options seemed right. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I need time to think." Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll give you space." "But Emma," he leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that last night wasn't just some fantasy for me. It wasn't just about that first time I saw you, like that. It's about how I feel when I'm with you. Like I can finally breathe after holding my breath for years." His words made Emma's heart ache. She felt the same way, as if something that had been missing had suddenly been found. But at what cost? "I need to figure things out with Jack," she said. "He deserves better than this." Tom stood up, still holding her hand. "I understand, but promise me one thing, don't make a decision based just on guilt. Make it based on what you truly want." Emma stood too, drawn to him despite her conflicted feelings. Tom pulled her gently into his arms, his embrace warm and comforting. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I should go," he whispered against her hair. Emma nodded but didn't step away. Instead, she lifted her face to his. Their kiss was different from the passionate ones they had shared the night before, tender, bittersweet, filled with uncertainty about the future. The day of Jack's return dawned clear and bright, mocking Emma's inner turmoil. For 3 days she had barely slept, torn between guilt and longing. Tom had kept his promise to give her space, sending only one text, "Thinking of you. Whatever you decide, I'm here." The message had both comforted and tormented her. Emma had cleaned the house obsessively, as if scrubbing away every trace of what had happened could somehow erase her betrayal. She had rehearsed different scenarios in her mind, confessing everything to Jack, saying nothing and trying to forget Tom, or the most terrifying option, telling Jack she wanted to end their marriage. She was setting the table for dinner when she heard Jack's key in the lock. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she forced a smile onto her face. "Emma," Jack called, dropping his bags in the hallway. "I'm home." He appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up at the sight of her. Emma felt a wave of affection mixed with crushing guilt. This man loved her. He trusted her. And she had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way. "Welcome home," she said, letting him pull her into an embrace. his familiar scent, his warmth. It all felt both right and wrong at the same time. When he kissed her, Emma found herself involuntarily comparing it to Tom's kisses. The realization made her pull away, disgusted with herself. "I missed you," Jack said, not noticing her discomfort. "The conference was interesting, but those hotel beds are awful. I couldn't wait to get home to you." Emma turned away, busying herself with dinner preparations. "Are you hungry? I made your favorite." Over dinner, Jack talked about his trip, the people he'd met, the presentations he'd given. Emma nodded and smiled in all the right places, but her mind was elsewhere. The weight of her secret made it hard to breathe, hard to look her husband in the eye. "Oh, did Tom fix the bathroom faucet?" Jack asked casually, helping himself to more food. Emma nearly dropped her fork. "Yes," she managed to say. "It's fixed." "Good. I'll have to thank him next time I see him." Jack took a sip of wine. "Actually, I ran into his brother at the airport. He mentioned Tom's looking at a job offer in Seattle. Did he say anything about that to you?" Seattle. The word hit Emma like a physical blow. Tom was thinking of moving across the country. Had that been his plan all along, or was it because of what happened between them? "No," she said, her voice strained. "He didn't mention it." Jack continued talking, oblivious to her distress. Emma felt as if she were drowning, the room closing in around her. The thought of Tom leaving, of never seeing him again, brought an unexpected clarity. In that moment she knew what she had to do. "Jack," she interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "We need to talk." Jack looked up, finally noticing the seriousness in her expression. "What's wrong?" Emma took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking while you were away. About us. About our marriage." Jack set down his fork, his full attention on her now. "What about our marriage?" "Are you happy, Jack? Truly happy?" Emma asked, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Jack looked confused. "Of course I'm happy, aren't you?" The question hung in the air between them. Emma chose her next words carefully. "I think we've been drifting apart for a long time. We go through the motions, but something's missing." Jack's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Where is this coming from, Emma? Did something happen while I was away?" The direct question made Emma flinch. This was her chance to confess, to tell him everything about Tom. Instead, she found herself shaking her head. "Nothing happened. I just had time to think. About what I want. About what we both deserve." She reached across the table to take his hand. "Jack, I care about you so much, but I don't think I'm in love with you anymore. And I don't think you're in love with me either, not really." Jack pulled his hand away, his face hardening. "You don't get to tell me how I feel," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I love you. I've always loved you." "Then why do we barely talk anymore?" Emma asked gently. "Why do we sleep on opposite sides of the bed? When was the last time we really connected, not just went through the motions of being married?" Jack stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. "So you want a divorce? Is that what this is about?" "I want us both to be honest with ourselves," Emma said, remaining seated. "I want us both to have a chance at real happiness, not just comfortable routine." Jack paced the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. "Is there someone else?" he asked suddenly, turning to face her. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. She had promised herself she wouldn't lie to him anymore, but she also couldn't bring herself to hurt him with the full truth. "This isn't about someone else," she said carefully. "This is about us. About what's best for both of us in the long run." Jack stared at her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time. "I need some air," he said finally, grabbing his jacket. "Don't wait up." After he left, Emma sat alone at the table, tears streaming down her face. She had taken the first step toward honesty, but the road ahead was still long and painful. She didn't know if she and Tom had a future together, or if she had just destroyed her marriage for nothing. All she knew was that she couldn't continue living a lie. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Tom, I turned down the Seattle job. I couldn't leave without knowing." Emma closed her eyes, clutching the phone to her chest. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the way things were before. The moment Tom had accidentally walked into her bedroom months ago had set in motion changes that couldn't be undone. For better or worse, their lives were now irrevocably connected.